Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters, and welcome back to the Islamic Shahada channel. Bhutan is a small Himalayan kingdom known by its official title, the Land of the Thunder Dragon. The term comes from the Dzongkha name Druk Yul, which literally means the Land of the Thunder Dragon, referring to the national symbol of Bhutan, the dragon that represents the country's identity, authority, and cultural heritage. Bhutan is widely recognized for its unique approach to development through gross national happiness, as well as its commitment to preserving Vajrayana Buddhism as the core of its national philosophy. But within this highly homogeneous and deeply Buddhist society, there exists a very small and often overlooked minority, Muslims in Bhutan. Bhutan's modern political identity traces back to the early 17th century when a Tibetan Lama and polity builder, Ngawang Namgyal, often called the first Zhabdrung Rinpoche, established political unity in the western and central valleys of the Bhutanese Himalaya. Prior to his arrival, the region consisted of loosely connected valley communities, local chieftains, and competing religious institutions. Ngawang Namgyal consolidated authority by combining religious leadership with temporal power and by building dzongs, fortress monasteries, that served simultaneously as administrative centers, military strongholds, and monastic seats. He instituted a dual system of government, theory and practice that divided spiritual and temporal authority, that shaped Bhutanese governance for centuries over time. Regional aristocratic families, and the Drukpa Kagyu lineage, a school within Tibetan Buddhism, consolidated influence. Local customs and monastic institutions fused into an enduring state culture. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Bhutan navigated pressure from its larger neighbors. The monarchy was formally established in the early 20th century to provide political stability and diplomatic continuity. During the 20th century, Bhutan maintained a cautious and controlled relationship with the outside world. Selective diplomatic ties, limited trade corridors, and tightly regulated social contact with neighboring India and Tibet. These historical choices, anchored in a religious national synthesis, left Bhutan culturally cohesive and institutionally conservative going into the modern era. Vajrayana Buddhism, sometimes referred to as Tantric or Tantric Vajrayana practice within Tibetan Buddhism, is central to Bhutan's cultural, ritual, and institutional life. The Drukpa Kagyu school became the dominant lineage and remains deeply embedded in state symbols, monastic education, and public ritual. Monasteries and dzongs are not only places of worship, but also centers for education, local dispute resolution, annual ritual cycles, and provisioning of social services in rural areas. Bhutanese identity is intertwined with Vajrayana forms of practice. Festivals, chechu, ritual performance, prayer flags, and monastic calendrical life shape the civic year. Because the monarchy and many state institutions historically derived legitimacy from close ties to the monastic establishment, religious values became social values. The state's symbols and ceremonies consistently evoke Buddhist cosmology and ethics. Merit, nonviolence, community obligation, and ritual practice are social norms that inform local governance and family life. This deep entanglement of religion and polity explains why Bhutan's public sphere tends to prioritize cultural continuity and social cohesion over rapid social experimentation. Gross national happiness is both a philosophical framing and a policy orientation that Bhutan made explicit in the late 20th century. Rather than evaluating national progress solely through economic output, the Bhutanese leadership articulated well-being as a multidimensional objective encompassing material welfare, cultural preservation, environmental sustainability, good governance, and psychological well-being. Over time, authorities translated the idea into measurable domains and indicators, covering areas such as health, education, community vitality, ecological diversity, and subjective life satisfaction, that inform planning and project appraisal. GNH functions on two levels: rhetorical and operational. Rhetorically, it expresses a normative stance that development should improve quality of life in a broad sense. Operationally, it encourages cross-sectoral review of policies to prevent projects that raise GDP while undermining social cohesion, environment, or culture. Implementation has included public investment in health and education, strong conservation standards, restrictions on environmentally damaging activities, and tourism strategies designed to limit mass visitation while capturing sustainable revenue. From the time of its political consolidation under the Zhabdrung and subsequent regional aristocracies, Bhutan maintained a posture of limited external engagement. Geographical factors, high mountains and narrow passes, and geopolitical realities, powerful neighbors to the south and north, encouraged self-reliance and defensive caution. Through much of the 18th to 20th centuries, Bhutan's rulers managed external relations selectively. Commercial links existed with neighboring Indian plains and Tibetan regions, but political modernization and mass exposure to global forces were intentionally constrained. This relative isolation meant that many social and administrative practices remained local and conservative. External communications, mass media, and large-scale tourism were avoided or strictly regulated. The state's approach emphasized cultural continuity and the prevention of destabilizing external influences, a posture that persisted until the middle decades of the 20th century. Beginning in the mid-20th century and accelerating from the 1960s to the 1990s, Bhutan undertook deliberate modernization while attempting to preserve cultural identity. National leaders initiated planned development programs, investments in basic infrastructure, roads, clinics, schools, the establishment of centralized administration, and institution building that included legal reform and measured economic opening. Development planning introduced modern sectors, public health, formal education, and administrative bureaucracy into areas that had been governed through local customary structures. At the same time, Bhutan approached modernization incrementally and tightly managed its exposure to global culture. Policies limited the number of foreign visitors, regulated media and broadcasting, television and widespread internet access were adopted relatively late, and prioritized projects consistent with environmental and cultural goals. In the political sphere, the country gradually evolved institutional arrangements. The monarchy played a guiding role in steering cautious liberalization, culminating in constitutional reforms and the introduction of parliamentary democracy in the early 21st century. Economic strategies emphasized hydropower exports to neighboring India, sustainable tourism, and carefully negotiated foreign assistance. The result is a distinctive modernization path. Material development and institutional modernization have proceeded, but within a constrained framework that seeks to sustain tradition, social cohesion, and environmental stewardship. Bhutan's policy choices demonstrate the tension many small, culturally cohesive states face. How to secure socio-economic improvement without eroding the cultural fabric that defines national identity. The history of Islam in Bhutan is subtle, fragmented, and largely undocumented, especially when compared to the well-recorded spread of Islam in South Asia. Bhutan has never experienced a large-scale wave of Islamic expansion, nor has it seen the establishment of major Muslim institutions in the earlier centuries. Instead, the presence of Islam in Bhutan emerged gradually through the slow movement of people, trade, and labor across the Himalayan region. The first signs of Muslim presence appear in historical patterns of commerce that connected Bhutan with neighboring territories such as Bengal, Assam, Bihar, and Uttar Pradesh. These regions had long established Muslim populations involved in trade, craftsmanship, and metalwork. As early as the 18th century, Muslim merchants began entering Bhutanese border towns, primarily for economic reasons. They were not missionaries, Nor were they part of any organized migration. They were traders looking to exchange textiles, spices, tools, metal goods, and everyday commodities with Bhutanese communities living in valleys near the southern borders. Alongside traders, small numbers of Muslim craftsmen and itinerant workers from Nepal and Tibet gradually made their way into Bhutan. These groups typically included blacksmiths, metal workers, knife makers, and artisans skilled in traditional crafts. Their arrival was driven not by religious expansion, but by the practical demand for labor and craftsmanship within Bhutan's isolated, mountainous economy. Because Bhutan's Buddhist society relied heavily on imported labor for certain types of metalwork and construction, Muslim artisans often formed part of temporary or seasonal labor groups moving across the Himalayas. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, these patterns became more visible, though still limited. Islam remained a small cultural footprint, a few families, scattered individuals, and transient laborers. There were no mosques, no religious institutions, and no official records recognizing Muslim communities. Encounters between Muslims and Bhutanese society were primarily commercial and utilitarian. A more noticeable change occurred between the 1970s and 1990s, a period when Bhutan slowly opened to the outside world and began undertaking major development projects such as road building, hydropower construction, and urban expansion. These projects required a larger workforce than the local population could provide. As a result, Bhutan saw a rise in migration from India and Nepal, including Muslims who came as contractors, construction workers, tailors, traders, and small-scale entrepreneurs. It is during this later period that Bhutan's small urban Muslim communities began to take shape. These communities were not formed through religious outreach or proselytization. Instead, they emerged out of long-term residence by migrant families who gradually settled in towns such as Thimphu, Phuentsholing, and Galefu. Many of them maintained close ties with their ancestral regions in India or Nepal, often traveling across borders for family events and religious holidays. Importantly, Bhutan's Muslim presence has never grown through organized Dawah, Islamic mission. Conversion among Bhutanese citizens is extremely rare due to the country's deeply rooted Buddhist identity and strict regulations surrounding religion. Islam's presence in Bhutan is therefore best understood as a byproduct of economic mobility, cross-border trade networks, and regional labor flows rather than religious expansion. Today, Muslims in Bhutan remain a small but stable minority, quiet, economically active, and integrated into the rhythms of Bhutanese urban life, while maintaining their cultural and religious traditions largely in private or through small community gatherings. Understanding the Muslim population in Bhutan requires careful interpretation because the Bhutanese government does not release official religious demographic data. Unlike many countries that publish detailed censuses on ethnicity and faith, Bhutan deliberately avoids specifying religious categories in its public population reports. This policy reflects the government's emphasis on national cohesion through cultural unity, rather than highlighting differences among religious or ethnic groups. Because of this lack of official data, researchers, international organizations, and Bhutanese diaspora communities rely on indirect estimates. Most assessments suggest that the number of Muslims in Bhutan ranges between 1,000 and 5,000 people, a very small group, representing well under 1% of the country's population. This makes Islam one of the smallest minority religions in Bhutan. The composition of Bhutan's Muslim population is diverse. A significant portion consists of migrant workers from India and Bangladesh, especially those employed in construction, trade, tailoring, hospitality, and small-scale business sectors. Many of these individuals work temporarily in Bhutan's border towns, primarily Phuentsholing, Galefu, and Samdrup Jongkar, where cross-border economic activity is part of daily life. Their presence often fluctuates depending on work contracts and economic conditions. Another segment of the Muslim population is made up of long-term traders and business families, some of whom have lived in Bhutan for multiple generations. These individuals may operate shops, textile businesses, or craft workshops. Although their ancestors came from northern India, Nepal, or Tibetan regions, they have gradually become integrated into the social and economic fabric of Bhutanese towns. A smaller but notable group consists of Bhutanese citizens of mixed ancestry, individuals whose families include both Bhutanese and South Asian Muslim heritage. These residents tend to be more settled, with deeper roots in the country. However, because religion is not a public census category, the exact number of such families is unknown. In terms of legal status, Muslims in Bhutan fall into several categories. Some are full Bhutanese citizens, either by birth or naturalization, forming part of the country's small but permanent Muslim minority. Others are long-term residents with official permits that allow them to live and work in Bhutan, but without citizenship rights. A large portion, especially from India and Bangladesh, are temporary laborers or cross-border workers, entering Bhutan for specific jobs and returning home periodically. These workers often represent the most visible segment of the Muslim presence in Bhutan, especially in southern urban centers. Despite their small numbers, Muslims contribute to Bhutan's economy and urban life in practical and meaningful ways. They operate essential services such as tailoring, metalwork, small shops, and restaurants. Their presence reflects the reality of Bhutan as a country that, despite its emphasis on cultural preservation, has increasingly engaged with regional economies over the last few decades. Yet, because of the absence of official statistics and the small size of the community, Muslims in Bhutan remain largely invisible in national narratives, often known only through local observation rather than formal documentation. Their identity in Bhutan is shaped not by public institutions or religious expansion, but by work, mobility, and the practical demands of everyday economic life. The daily life of Muslims in Bhutan is shaped by the realities of being one of the smallest religious minorities in a country where Buddhism is deeply integrated into national identity, public life, and cultural expression. Because the Muslim population is tiny and largely unregistered in official statistics, their presence is subtle and often goes unnoticed in the broader social landscape. This subtlety is reflected in every aspect of their religious, social, and economic life. One of the clearest indicators of the community's size is the fact that Bhutan has no official mosque. The government has never approved a formal masjid structure, partly due to strict regulations on land, construction, and religious institutions. As a result, Muslims have adapted by practicing their faith quietly and privately. Daily prayers, Friday gatherings, and Ramadan activities typically take place in rented rooms, small apartments, makeshift community halls, or the private homes of long-term residents. These spaces are modest, often just a carpeted room with minimal furniture, but they serve as a spiritual anchor for workers and families who want to maintain their religious obligations despite limited resources. Because the community is small and widely dispersed, religious activities rarely take the form of large gatherings. Instead, Muslims in Bhutan follow a minimalist style of worship, focused on personal devotion rather than institutional structure. Their practice is shaped more by practicality and necessity than by formal organization. Many Muslims, especially migrant workers, pray alone or in very small groups, respecting local sensitivities and ensuring that their activities remain peaceful and unobtrusive. Economically, Muslims in Bhutan tend to work in sectors that allow flexibility and do not require formal institutional presence. Common occupations include retail shopkeeping, small-scale trading, tailoring, carpentry, metalwork, handicraft production, and food services. In border towns such as Puensholing and Samdrup Jonkar, many Muslim traders operate small stores that serve both Bhutanese and cross-border customers. Others work in construction, hospitality, or small roadside businesses. Halal food is another challenge. Bhutan has very limited halal culinary infrastructure, and there are virtually no official halal restaurants or butchers. Most Muslims rely on vegetarian meals, imported packaged goods, or meat sourced from India. Some families prepare halal food privately for small community gatherings, but the options remain modest. Socially, Muslims in Bhutan maintain a low profile. Their lifestyle reflects a balance between respecting Bhutan's cultural environment and preserving their own religious traditions. Without large institutions or formal community organizations, religious transmission happens quietly, through family, personal discipline, and the preservation of essential practices such as prayer, fasting, and maintaining halal standards as much as possible. In this unique environment, the Muslim community has developed a distinct identity, a quiet, resilient minority whose faith persists not through visibility or public expression, but through simplicity, personal consistency, and cultural adaptation. Their presence may be small, but their contribution to Bhutan's economic diversity and the quiet dignity with which they practice their religion offers a valuable and often overlooked dimension of life inside the land of the Thunder Dragon. Although Bhutan's Muslim population is small and dispersed, several urban and border regions host modest but identifiable communities. Their presence is shaped by economic opportunities, proximity to India, and the availability of informal spaces where they can gather for prayer and community activities. Thimphu, the capital city, contains the largest and most stable Muslim presence in Bhutan. Because it is the country's administrative and economic hub, many Muslims, particularly long-term residents, work in small shops, vegetable markets, tailoring stalls, or artisanal workshops. A key feature of the Muslim community in Thimphu is the use of informal rented spaces for prayer, including Friday congregations. These makeshift rooms, usually located above shops or in modest apartment buildings, function as temporary gathering points for worship and religious discussions. While the city does not have a mosque, these spaces allow the community to maintain essential practices and preserve social cohesion. Thimphu's Muslim population tends to include a mix of long-settled families, cross-border workers, and temporary laborers employed in retail, handicrafts, and small food businesses. Their presence contributes subtly to the city's multicultural economic fabric. Phuentsholing, located directly on the border with the Indian town of Jaigaon, is widely considered the most diverse and economically vibrant city in Bhutan. The constant movement of goods, traders, and workers across the border has made this town a natural entry point for Muslim laborers from India and Bangladesh. The Muslim population here is highly mobile, consisting largely of migrant workers, day laborers, textile traders, and restaurant employees. Because it is Bhutan's busiest trading city, many Muslims find work in wholesale markets, transportation, logistics, and cross-border retail. Religious practice typically occurs in small, rented rooms or shared accommodations. While these spaces are not formally recognized, they serve as essential centers for daily and Friday prayers, especially for workers who live far from their home countries. Phuenttsholing's multicultural environment makes it the most visibly diverse city in Bhutan, even though the Muslim presence still remains modest relative to the whole population. Samdrup Jongkar, located along the border with the Indian state of Assam, has long served as one of Bhutan's oldest trading corridors. Historically, traders from Assam, Bihar, and Bengal traveled through this region to exchange goods, and some Muslim merchants eventually settled in the area. Today, Samdrup Jongkar hosts a small number of long-established Muslim families who have lived in the city for decades. Their economic roles often include trading household goods, operating small shops, or engaging in transportation and cross-border business. Because of its historical trading character, Samdrup Jongkar maintains steady economic ties with India, which helps sustain a small but stable Muslim presence. As in other regions, religious practice occurs privately or in rented spaces. Galephu, located in southern Bhutan, is a rapidly developing commercial town that has seen increased investment in infrastructure, transportation, and cross-border trade. This growth has attracted migrant workers, including a small number of Muslims primarily from India. The Muslim community here is mainly composed of temporary laborers, construction workers, retail staff, and small traders. While the population is not as established as in Thimphu or Samdrup-Yongkar, Gellifu's expanding economy is gradually creating a more recognizable Muslim presence. Religious gatherings are limited and typically held in shared rooms used by groups of workers. There are no permanent facilities, but the community maintains its practices quietly and consistently. Bhutan shares borders only with India and China, and this geography largely explains how Muslims are present in the country. Since Bhutan does not border Bangladesh or Nepal, the Muslim population grows mainly through its close economic ties with India. India is Bhutan's largest economic partner, supplying most labor for construction, retail, and small trade. Many of these workers come from Indian regions with large Muslim populations. For stability, Bhutan restricts political activities and public religious propagation. As long as migrant Muslims remain focused on work and avoid political or missionary activity, their presence is tolerated. Bhutan officially guarantees freedom of religion, but it does so within a controlled framework designed to preserve social harmony and protect the country's Buddhist cultural identity. This means minority religions are allowed to exist, yet they are not actively supported or promoted by the state. For the Muslim community, this creates a unique dynamic. Public construction of mosques is not permitted, largely because Bhutan restricts the establishment of new religious institutions unless they are considered essential to Bhutanese culture or heritage. As a result, Muslims practice their faith in private spaces, rented rooms, community halls, or homes converted into simple prayer areas. Religious propagation or organized missionary activity is also highly restricted. This applies to all minority religions, not just Islam. Bhutan's laws emphasize avoiding any form of proselytization that could disrupt its religious and cultural cohesion. Therefore, Muslim religious life in Bhutan remains quiet, family-centered, and non-public. Despite these limitations, Muslims generally maintain peaceful and positive relations with the Buddhist majority. Community members often describe Bhutan as a respectful and safe place, provided religious practices remain private and low profile. Social interactions in markets, workplaces, and neighborhoods tend to be friendly, reflecting Bhutan's broader cultural emphasis on harmony. Looking ahead, the Muslim population in Bhutan is expected to remain small but stable. The lack of major migration channels and Bhutan's strict social policies make rapid demographic shift unlikely. A formal mosque still seems improbable in the near future, but community prayer spaces are likely to become more organized as the population becomes slightly more settled. Urbanization, especially in areas like Thimphu and Gellifu, may create more opportunities for Muslim workers and small business owners, strengthening the community's economic presence. Younger Muslims, whether citizens or migrant children, are growing up with greater digital access, allowing them to connect with Islamic education online and maintain ties with communities outside Bhutan. This digital ecosystem may become crucial in sustaining their identity. Islam in Bhutan will likely continue to develop quietly, shaped by economic mobility, cross-border ties, and gradual social adaptation. Bhutan is a small yet strikingly unique nation, defined by its mountains, monarchy, and deeply rooted Buddhist culture. Within this larger identity, the Muslim community exists in silence, small in number, understated in visibility, yet steady in faith. Their story is not one of expansion or conflict, but of persistence. They pray in rented rooms, raise families in a predominantly Buddhist society, and maintain tradition far from their ancestral homelands. In the land of the Thunder Dragon, these Muslims form one of the smallest threads in the spiritual tapestry of the Himalayas. And for them, happiness comes not from numbers or recognition, but from the quiet certainty of holding on to their belief, softly, humbly, and steadfastly, in a place very different from home. Thanks for watching until the end. I hope it was useful. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.